Hello, I'm Molly Carlile. I'm the Consortium Manager for the North and West Metropolitan Region Palliative Care Consortium, and I'm here today to talk to you about how you can go about initiating conversations, particularly with children who are facing the imminent death of somebody that they love. In the last podcast, I talked about how you have conversations with families, and I'm focusing particularly on children today because even though children are a part of families, often through no fault of their own, families exclude children from the process around a death because they're trying to protect them. Most families want to make sure that their kids don't have to come in contact with anything that's likely to make them sad, that's likely to make them fearful, that's likely to make them anxious. And therefore, when someone in the family gets a terminal diagnosis, often the children are the last to be told, if they're told at all. And as health providers and health professionals, that makes it extremely difficult for us because the children look to us to provide them with information. And if they've not been provided with any information in their families, it puts us in a very difficult position. So I'd like to reinforce what I said earlier about really connecting with families and creating an environment of trust. Because if families trust us, they will then trust us to have those conversations with the children being involved in them. That won't occur if there's not a situation or an environment of trust between the families and ourselves. When it comes to children, not only do parents want to protect them, but often they create a whole range of unrealistic goals around the imminent death. And they may say things like, "Oh, you don't need to worry, Grandma will get better." Or when the child says, "I'm worried about Grandma, is she going to die?" The adult may say, "Oh, no, she won't die for years yet." And of course, when we know that Grandma is going to die, this is sending very mixed messages to the children. It's saying that the parent isn't prepared to discuss it with the child, so the child feels excluded, the child doesn't feel part of the family, the child thinks they're not important. But B, it sets up a culture of the child then starting to question what other things happening in the family aren't based on truth. So if Mum lied to me about Grandma dying and Grandma then dies, can I trust her if I ask her something else that's really important? Or is she going to not tell me the truth next time? So we have to be very careful about that. And as health professionals, it's up to us to explain this to adults, particularly to parents, to reinforce to them the importance of being truthful and honest with their kids, no matter how awful the reality of the news that they have to tell them. Because that trust relationship is what will nurture the kids through this experience. Another thing to keep in mind is that kids have extraordinarily vivid imaginations. And when you ask children about dying, often the things that they imagine are 50 times worse than what dying's really like in reality. So by not preparing them, by not explaining to them what dying looks like, we're leaving them at the mercy of their own imaginations, which can be incredibly fearful for particularly young children. The other thing about avoiding discussing imminent death with children is when the person does die, it's difficult for the child to come to terms with the reality of the death. So if the last time they saw their grandma, they were down the beach with her having a swim, and then they didn't see her for 2 months, and the next thing, Mum comes home from the hospital and says, "Oh, Grandma died today." It's very hard for a child to take that information on board in the absence of seeing a deterioration in Grandma's health or seeing her dying or seeing her after she's died. So even though the child spending time with the dying grandmother may not be something that makes the family feel particularly comfortable, it's essential to the child's understanding of the reality and the permanence of the death. So how can we as health professionals go about smoothing this process, opening up the channels of communication in families to include children? Well, as I've said to you previously, it has to start with us doing some work on ourselves, asking questions of ourselves. Have we talked about death at home with our own children? And if we haven't, why haven't we? And usually that will give us a pretty good understanding of what our own fears and anxieties are. The second thing is, how do we approach families when they come in to visit someone, either in an acute setting or particularly in the community where someone's dying in their own home? You can't lock children out of the bedroom while the family member dies and expect that they won't feel excluded. My suggestion is that the sooner people sit down together as a family, including the children, and talk about what's happening now, what's likely to happen, and what may happen in the future, the sooner conversations can happen that are open and honest. Children need to be able to ask questions, and if we don't have the answer, we need to make sure that we find out for them and take that answer back to them. We need to know how much the child understands. What have they heard? And I guarantee you, if you ask a child that, you'll hear all sorts of snippets of information that they've picked up from adult conversations that they've heard little bits of. And of course they put those little bits together and often come up with a picture that's totally different from the reality of what's going on. So we need to find out how much they know, where they heard things. Did they hear, was it their parents saying things? Did their parents speak to them? Have other members of the family spoken to them? Have older children in the family spoken to them? What do they understand death being like? And how have they come to that conclusion? Because for most children, their first experiences with death will be through TV. And of course we all know that death as it's depicted on the television is nothing like it is in reality. So we need to start at the beginning and talk to the kids about what death really looks like. We need to assess that child's level of understanding and frame our explanations based on that level of understanding. So of course a 3-year-old child will need to know a totally different depth than a 7-year-old child or a 12-year-old child or an adolescent. So it's up to us to target the information in a way that makes sense for the age, the developmental age of the child. And of course we can't go sailing in and sitting children down in isolation and saying, well look, grandma's going to die soon and this is what's going to happen. It needs to be done in a way that the whole family's involved in the process, so that mum and dad are there and they see the discussion as it happens and they're part of the discussion, and so that the children are able to cry if they want to cry, and that the children are encouraged to see mum and dad cry if that's what needs to happen. Because when children don't see that level of pain and suffering in the adults around them, they don't understand that the adults are suffering too. I've had children say to me that they thought their parents didn't care that grandma was dying because they never saw them cry, they never saw them sad. And you and I know that that's because the parents were trying to protect the children. But children don't know that. So it's up to us to create that bridge between the families and the children. It's important never to talk down to children. Children will find you out. So sit on their level, speak on their level. When they ask a question, stop what you're doing and focus wholly and solely on the connection that they've created between the two of you. And this is something you can take into your own homes. If your own kids are asking you questions about death, don't keep doing what you're doing. Don't keep doing the vacuuming or the peeling the potatoes. Stop. Sit down with your child and answer their questions. And allow the conversation to evolve at the pace that the child finds comfortable. Let them drive the conversation. If we approach children like this, if we include children in the whole process, then the dying part doesn't become their constant focus of attention. What we're actually doing is freeing them up to spend time with the person that they love who's dying. If we can disempower the fear and anxiety around the dying, then we allow those children to spend time with the person that they love. Even if that means grandma looks very different and she's asleep most of the time. If they understand why that's occurring, it's a whole lot easier for them to stay in the space, to talk to grandma, understanding that even though she can't answer, she can hear them. And you know, these are simple things that we often avoid doing. This done well, children prepared well for experiencing death in their families, will be children who are able to openly grieve after the death. Will be children who, within their family groups, are able to talk about their grieving. So if they come home from school one day and they feel sad, they will feel confident in saying to their mum, I feel really sad today because I miss grandma. And the mother will feel confident to say, look, I feel really sad because I miss her too. And then you're building a depth of a relationship between the adults and the children in the family. And I'd suggest that we shouldn't be waiting until there's a terminal diagnosis in a family. What we should be doing is having conversations about death and grief before significant deaths occur in families. And we should be having these conversations not just in our families, but in our communities, in our school communities, in our religious communities, in our service clubs, in our sporting clubs, on mainstream film and television, so that children see death just as another part of life, that it doesn't become this enormous taboo thing to be fearful of. They understand the reality of it, and yet they are better equipped to deal with it when it happens, and then better equipped to deal with their grieving afterwards. And this is up to us. It's up to us to drive these conversations. And so maybe for you, it's about your start point may be having the conversation at home in your own families, and then extending it out as you feel more comfortable. But being confident that the more we inform, the more we protect, the more we support. So protection comes from information, not from withholding information. And support comes from the relationships that we build with children and families and with each other. And I hope that's given you something to think about.